Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I think a couple of things that need to be raised from the earlier speeches, which I was going to touch on the topics during my speech. One of the things that interests me, though, listening to the contribution from Jackie Baillie, is that I thought we'd come to a degree of consensus. Patrick Harvey excluded on this, and I know he has a different view from myself around air passenger duty and the benefits the air passenger duty reductions would bring for airports and economic activity in Scotland. And I thought the Labour Party were signed up to this. I now hear what seems like a rowing back on this from their front bench and a suggestion that they do not favour taking those steps to boost economic activity and support Scotland's airports. And I think that will be very interesting news for Scotland's airports, particularly for Aberdeen Airport in my constituency, where I know a number of potential routes would benefit significantly were that decision to be taken. Perhaps the front bench can clarify that a little bit later on in their speech. The second point that Jackie Baillie spoke about, and I realise it's a difficult balancing act for the Labour Party to try and, on the one hand, appear concerned by the situation as it affects the oil and gas sector, and yet at the same time try not to act as though they're pleased by the situation that arises. And it's a difficult balancing act which the previous Scottish Labour leader, Jim Murphy, spectacularly failed to carry off. But the point is this. The issue around when the oil price was high, it demonstrates the folly of the decision taken by the UK government to implement the supplementary charge, which therefore had a detrimental impact on the exploration activity at a time when the opportunity was there for exploration activity to take place. That meant that the industry, when the oil price lowered, was not in as advantageous a position as it might otherwise have been had exploration activity been stimulated and encouraged rather than being discouraged by that activity. But it would be remiss of me, Presiding Officer, during the period of offshore Europe, which takes place in my constituency, not to focus on both positive developments and opportunities within the sector. And I note yesterday an announcement from Lloyd's Register Energy that they will be developing a headquarter building at the Prime 4 Business Park in Kingswells in my constituency, which they say in their press release will be the largest LR office worldwide in terms of headcount. I think that's an important statement of confidence both in the North East economy but also in the energy sector moving forward. And then I was drawn to an article on the Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce blog today by Brian Wilson, and not often that you hear Brian Wilson being quoted on these benches, but it was one of his more temperate interventions, where he pointed out that in Azerbaijan alone, according to UKTI, there is £11 billion worth of export opportunities for British companies over the next few years as production of both oil and gas continue to expand. And one of the benefits that we have in Scotland and in the north east of Scotland in particular is an expertise base built up over many decades which can be exported into other countries and can bring benefits both in those areas, but also most crucially can bring benefits back to Scotland as a result of internationalisation and export of both talent and also of hardware and kit. And the point on the living wage and the fallacy that Murdo Fraser makes and that the Conservative Party make is that just by retitling the minimum wage as the living wage doesn't make it a living wage. What makes it a living wage is whether it meets the standard as applied to the living wage, which is why when the Conservatives increased the minimum wage, welcome through any increase in the minimum wage is, by not increasing it to the level of the living wage as applied by the Scottish Government, it cannot then be called a living wage if it does not meet the criteria of a living wage. Can it, Mr Brown?
Brown.
I'm grateful to the member for giving me. Would he at least acknowledge, though, that it is higher than the manifesto commitment of his party at the general election?
Exactly.
McDonald.
Just say yes.
Yes, he.
If all we're going to get from Mr Brown is this semantic argument, rather than looking at the reality of a living wage and what a living wage actually means, then we're not going to get very far at all. But I welcome the fact I welcome the fact that in Scotland we see now nearly 135,000 people employed by living wage accredited employers in Scotland. And I welcome the fact that the target has not just been exceeded but smashed in terms of living wage accredited companies, and as a result we're now looking for 500 by the dissolution of this Parliament. And the living wage is important for more than just the fact that it boosts incomes. It's also the fact that a workforce that is well paid and properly paid is a more productive workforce, and that links into the point about productivity that the Deputy First Minister made. Because if you have a workforce that is enthused by the fact that they're actually receiving a proper pay for a proper day's work, they then are more likely to be a more productive workforce, and that will bring economic benefit as well. So I believe, Presiding Officer, that there are positive stories to tell in terms of both the offshore sector but also the wider Scottish economy, and I support the Government's economic strategy.